let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the fourth episode of Thriv Talks on this wonderful sunny summer morning. Finally, it's here. Thriv Talks, of course, is our webinar series centered around topics of normalizing entrepreneurship and promoting the future of work movement. As I just said, it's the fourth episode today, so we've had a few of these in the past. We talked about topics like finances for entrepreneurs, insurances for entrepreneurs, and healthcare as well. And if you missed those talks and are interested in any of these topics, then please go check them out on our YouTube channel, where all the recordings of these are made available. Today's recording will be made available there as well after the fact. And today we will add to this great list of topics with a very interesting talk about the art of selling yourself. We'll get more into that in a minute. My name is Thomas. I'm a co-founder of Thriv, and we are, of course, a talent agency, a part of the Future as family. And before we do get into today's talk, then just a few words from me. I'm not sure how many of you are first-timers here. If you are, then welcome. And also if you're return visitors, happy to see you again. Thanks for joining. Of course, what we do at Thriv is we aim to normalize entrepreneurship and contribute to what we see as the future of work movement, where people can work in the way they want to work and what is best for them. And we do this, of course, by not only finding great project work and having community events for you, but also by doing things like this, where we promote and talk about topics that are interesting for entrepreneurs to be and around the topic of entrepreneurship in general. If you are interested in freelancing, becoming an entrepreneur, joining our community, then please do get in touch with us. There are several ways you can do this. You can reach out here in the chat, actually. There are several of us lurking around who will happily contact you. You can do it through our website at thriv.dev. And there's also various other social media channels you can reach out. Basically, any means that works for you will work for us. And likewise, if it's not quite for you, but you maybe know some people that could be really interested in this topic, we do have a referral program, and you can find more information on that on our social media, Instagram, for example. I think that's enough for me almost. A few words maybe about today's topic and today's keynote speaker. Linnea Saari will tell us this morning about, well, like I said, the art of selling yourself. So it's all about communication, which is a really, really interesting topic. Linnea is not only my lovely colleague here at Thriv, so if you are in our network, you might have had the pleasure of chatting with her before, but she's also the founder of ImproLead, which is the company she's representing here today. If you have any questions during the presentation, Linnea will happily answer them at the end. You can just write them in chat, and I will, at the end, make sure to ask those questions, and we will go through them all. But yeah, enough from me. Let's give the stage to Linnea and get into today's topic. Hi, Linnea.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you. Let me first do the technical part. So let me share the screen just a moment. So first of all, thank you, Thomas, for the introduction, and wonderful morning, everyone, and hello from Helsinki. And welcome to our today's webinar, which is the art of selling yourself. And as Thomas already introduced, but I will say it again, my name is Linnea Saari, and I'm the founder of ImproLead, which is a coaching company that specializes in helping companies, managers, and teams to improve their communication skills and work better together. I've personally been doing improvisation for almost 10 years, and what improvisation basically is that it's fine-tuned, high-level communication, because you need to be able to be fully present and listen to the other person to create a scene or whatever we're creating from one gesture or, for example, from one word. So improv is a great starting point when we're discussing about the communication and especially the art of selling yourself. And I've spent the past year in working with Thriv in tech industry, and during that time, I've seen the importance of effective communication in this world of freelance business. And it's not enough to be just a skilled developer or programmer, but to be successful actually in this industry, you need to be able to sell yourself to potential clients and potential employers. And I believe that by teaching these communication methods effectively to effectively, we can help everybody to unlock their full potential and help them get their dream gig, what they are looking for. So without further ado, let's get started with this webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and even though it would be great to have this sort of a dialogue kind of situation here with all of you guys, we have quite a lot of people here in this meeting. So if you have any questions, write them down in the chat and we'll get back to them at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. So today's webinar, as said, is about the art of selling yourself. So when we are changing slides, so first of all, we need to start by asking ourselves the question, what is selling yourself? And at its core, selling yourself is about more than just listing your qualifications and experience. And it's more about communicating the value in a way that speaks to the needs of the listener. And so it's a lot more than just telling and bottling out what you have and what you know. It's about also listening what the other person needs. So in practice, what it means that you need to be able to tell your relevant experience in a way that goes beyond simply, for example, repeating your resume. It means like crafting a story that highlights your strengths, your achievements, and the unique qualities that make you stand out from the crowd. And it's not just about it's not just about what you say, but it's also about how you make the other person feel. So remember that we do not work in a vacuum, and the people we collaborate with are looking for more than just a technical skill or industry knowledge. They also want to know that you're someone that they can trust, someone who's easy to work with, and someone who can bring positive energy and enthusiasm to the table. So when you're presenting yourself, don't just focus on the content, but also on what you don't just focus on the content on what you're saying, but also think about the tone that you're speaking with, the body language, what you're giving out, and the overall impression that you're making. And you can ask yourself the questions as, are you coming across as confident, engaging, and passionate? Also, good question is to ask is that, are you listening actively, especially actively, to the other person's needs and concerns? And are you showing genuine interest on the other person's goals and objectives? And of course, if you can answer yes to all of these questions, then you're well on your way of mastering the art of selling yourself. And remember that it's not just about what you can do, it's about how you can make the difference in the lives of other people that you're working with. So now that we have a clear understanding of what selling yourself actually is, let's talk about a little why it's actually crucial to talk about this topic in this current market. So first of all, the quite obvious one is to compete with the market. So if we rewind a little back to 2022, the market situation was maybe a bit different. There was quite a lot of projects for freelancers on the table, and you get to be in this like cherry picking position. So you could be proposed to several cases at the same time, and you get to choose whatever you wish to do. And there was not that much competition. So you were really in this prime position. But after that, some things have happened. So we know that there's war going on, and due to that, we now have inflation. And the market situation has a bit slowed down. Of course, people are still doing development and they need developers to do that, but the competition has toughened a bit. So communication skills matter even more in today's environment and in today's market when you're a freelancer. And of course, that leads naturally to the situation where you need to stand out from the crowd. So while you may be very experienced and have a perfect CV with a lot of great experience, there might be several, and usually there is several other candidates who have somewhat similar background as you do. So what is the thing that when the hiring manager is doing the selection, what this person is looking for? This person is not counting the months on how many months you have been working on certain place, but he's looking for other factors, and those decisive factors in those situations are usually the communication skills, which are actually one of the top hiring factors for employers when they're choosing somebody. And we hear this quite often, that we see two, for example, quite neck to neck candidates, and the client chooses the one that had better communication skills. So it can definitely be the make it or break it for you when you're looking for a gig. And of course, the one really important one, which is to keep your network happy. I could have said keep your client happy, but I want to say network. So happy clients and also your coworkers. So when you have good communication skills, it increases the satisfaction and the overall happiness that you have between people, and it leads to positive feedback and again to further referrals, which is of course the lifeblood of any freelancer business. So that makes you, when you're, for example, when you're looking for the next gig, you had good reference behind you, but also if you want to stay within the gig, it helps you stay there further. And of course, especially when we are in Finland, the market is not that big. So people talk and good message will be passed on. So then when we're talking about the importance of the communication skills, we also have to understand that it's not easy to sell ourselves. And actually there's quite a many common mistakes that people do when they are trying to sell themselves, especially when we're talking about these interview situations. And here are the four most common ones that I've faced when it comes to freelancers, most common mistakes freelancers do when they're trying to sell themselves. And the first one is sell yourself short. And this is the cardinal sin, especially for Finns. And this is there comes this mentality where people say that, oh, I shouldn't lift my own tail. It's very rude to talk about myself. It's sort of about being cocky, for example. So there's this already inner mentality that you should not try to sell yourself. But if you're thinking that way, you're actually working against yourself when you're trying to get a gig. Of course, it's good to be humble, but it doesn't mean that you need to keep yourself in the shadow. So there's also this could, should, would, or coulda, shoulda, woulda mentality that I would like to call it. So people are, when they're looking for a project, they tend to say, I could be good for this position. I should be able to do this. I would be okay for this. So there is this uncertainty in your voice and uncertainty in the words that you choose. So instead of using those words, I would encourage people to use, I am good for this position because, and then you of course explain why you think you would be good for this. I will be able to do this because, and then you explain why you're able to do this and so on. So it gives this kind of like a trust that you trust within yourself, but it also makes the other person trust you more. So the question is, do you trust yourself and are you proud of your experience and are you comfortable saying that? Because if you are too humble, the other person might also start thinking, even though you would have perfect CV, why is this person downplaying himself or themselves too much? Is there something that we are missing from the CV, for example? And one exercise, especially if you feel that this is a challenge for you, there's this one exercise that I would encourage you to do, for example, right now. So get a piece of paper or whatever tool, or just do a mental note. But I want you to write down one thing, work-related or whatever, life-related, one thing that you are good at, one thing you're very good at, and one thing you are excellent at. So one thing you're good, one thing you're very good at, and one thing you are excellent at. And do not censor yourself too much. You don't need to share it with anybody. You don't need to share it with me or any other participants here, but this is just for you. So this is a great exercise because you get to have this mental check. First of all, is this easy for you to do? Do you feel that you have all these parts? Because I guarantee that every single one of you there behind the screens have something to put on each and every one of these categories. And especially the expert one or excellent one gives people the creeps like, oh, I'm not excellent in anything. I'm not a guru in anything. But that's not what excellent means. Excellent means that you are, for example, you're proficient in doing something. It's quite easy for you. If you face a problem, you know how to solve it, or you know where to look for help. Or if somebody's asking for your help on teaching that same thing, you are able to do that. So that, for example, can be understood as excellent. And this is also a very important exercise for you to do, because we also see these CVs where somebody has plus 10, plus 15 years of experience, and they've been using, for example, primarily just, let's say, Java. And then still in their CV, they rate their Java experience as adequate or something, even though it has been the prime tool that they've been using in their past 10 years. So this is an exercise, for example, that you can do weekly, and it helps you to build your inner confidence. The other thing that people tend to make is this, it's in the CV comment. So people, when they are in this interview situation, or for example, when they are asked to clarify something or go a little bit deeper about their experience, they tend to say, it's in the CV. It might come out as verbally, or they might feel like, and then they start explaining. So there's this nonverbal message that like, why are you asking? But you need to think of your CV as your business card, just as an introduction. So for example, if I handed out you my business card, you wouldn't automatically know me. Of course, you need to ask me more questions. So CV is your introduction to make the other person interested, but you must be able to tell the story that is and lies within that CV. Then, of course, we have this employees or valuable partners discussion. So as an external asset, when you're a freelancer in a gig, different kind of communication is needed from you, and your input is valuable and expected. So what this means is that excellent communication skills are expected from you. So you cannot just wait around for people to tell you what to do or check on you, how you're doing, or so on. So you need to initiate and be proactive in those conversations. So if something is wrong, you need to discuss about it. If something's going well, you need to also communicate that. Or if you have any desires or any other things that you need to discuss, you need to be the one to bring them to the table. So you need to be owning the communication in that sense. And one thing that we also have is this tough behavior, which does not mean expert behavior. So some people might have this some kind of a understanding that if you're tough and you send only short messages and you're really strict, it means that you are considered as an expert, which is not true. So people love to see that you are enthusiastic and you are motivated to the project and you are kind and you're a great person to talk with. It doesn't take away your professionalism. So especially if you're remotely, open your cameras and don't forget to smile and be friendly to the people that you're working with. Of course, for example, especially if there's something that needs to be fixed or you want to give some criticism, definitely do that. But remember that it should be constructive and you don't have to be tough or, let's say, mean about it. So when we're talking about these common mistakes, we can go a little further on what the actual ways to communicate are. And we can sort of divide them in 4 different categories. So we have the nonverbal one, we have the written communication, we have my face is on top of the slide, I cannot see it, but verbal, and then we have active listening. It says active on the cannot remember the word for those, but in Sulket, and but there it's like listening, because usually people think that, yeah, listening is a skill, of course. But if you're just hearing something and you let it pass from the other ear, that is not something that we're looking for. Hence the word active. And we're gonna go through all of these different parts and give you a little do's and don'ts and other tips on how to use this when you want to sell yourself and sell your skills further to other people. So first of all, what we have here is the nonverbal communication. So this is what you get, like facial expressions, tone of voice, gestures, and body language. And they can play a key role in selling yourself, as it can convey important information about you and something that you cannot actually convey through words. So for example, about your personality, your confidence, and in general, your interpersonal skills. And it's also one major player when it comes to communication. So it conveys more meanings than words. And it's over half of all the communication that we do. So for example, when we are remote or when we are face-to-face, for example, now that you are not showing your cameras, which is perfectly okay for this webinar, but that is, for example, one way for you to communicate to me, even though you are not giving anything to me. So body language is definitely an important factor. And I'm going to give you a little do's and don'ts on, especially when you're selling yourself. So let's start with the do's. So when you're meeting somebody, or when you're trying, when generally you're talking to somebody, sit or stand up straight. So it doesn't need to be that you have been swallowing a stick like this, but you can be a little relaxed, but have a good posture. And it also affects on you. For example, if I would start talking and be like this, and I would be slouching like this, it affects on my tone of voice, and it doesn't sound that good. And it also makes my facial expressions a lot harder. And it makes me cough. Sorry about that. But the posture that you give also gives energy to the message that you're trying to convey. So posture does matter, and it also helps you breathe a little better. Maintain an eye contact. I know it might be a bit hard for some people, and it does not mean that you need to be absolutely locked, but try to make the other person feel seen. So look at their eyes and give them this, and also give them these nonverbal cues such as smiles and nods, so you understand the other person has been heard, or the other person feels that they have been heard. And also, if you feel that some of these are really hard for you, do not focus so much that, oh, I need to sit up straight, I need to focus my eyes, I need to smile and nod. This does not look natural. So start with what's natural to you. And for example, if it's natural for you to be quite relaxed, but for example, maintaining eye contact can be hard for you. So start with relax, and by little, start working on the eye contact thingy. So start looking at people for a few seconds at a time, and remember that you can always look somewhere else from time to time, as long as it's somewhat concise. And of course, the don'ts are quite equivalent to the do's. So instead of sitting and standing straight, do not slouch and do not feature around. So turn around your chairs, or do messing with your hair or with your fingers, because this is quite distracting. It's different, for example, when I'm talking to you now, I'm using my hands as a tool to convey my message. So this is to me to support my tone, support my message. But if I would start doing this, I would feel like you would be a little confused on what I'm doing. So I'm just here fidgeting my fingers, or I'm rubbing my face. Of course, the other person, other thing not to do is to stare. That can make people feel quite uncomfortable. So remember to blink, and also try to remember to also to have an eye contact. So avoid the avoidance of eye contact. And of course, when you're talking to somebody, it's quite important that you focus on that person and focus on that discussion. For example, it's very common nowadays when we're in Zoom meetings to have a Iltalehti or Kauppalehti or whatever newspaper open at the same time and read it. It's quite normal, but people can see it. You can also see on somebody's face if this other person is reading or something else. So give that person and give that discussion your full attention. You can get so much more out of it, and the other person can get so much more out of it too. And especially if you feel that you feel anxious in meeting people, here are some tips I'd like to give you. So one part is 2-point breathing. You probably heard that if you're stressed, to breathe in and breathe out. But there's this 2-point breathing, is where you breathe in and breathe again. So this kind of a 2-point breathing gives you much deeper breathing, and it relaxes you more. So if you feel like it never helps you to just breathe deeply, this might be a good tool for you. And of course, if you feel that your mind is wandering, or you feel that you are very, very anxious and you cannot get that train of thought stopped, try to count backwards. For example, from 5. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That usually stops your brain from going any further, and it helps you to focus on the moment and sort of turn your head on and off again. And then, of course, if you, for example, before any meetings, try to find what is your Superman pose. So is there, for example, a literal Superman pose that makes you feel powerful? What is a position, just very caricature position that makes you feel good? So take that position, for example, in a bathroom before a meeting, because it actually makes you feel more powerful, and it feels that you own the situation, and it makes you seem more confident. And of course, anything can happen in a meeting. And if you still feel anxious, don't try to force it. You can say to the other person that I'm actually quite nervous, or something is happening. For example, I've said to you here, like, okay, I'm coughing here, for example, or it's hard to put slides on. So you can say it out loud, because people tend to be on your side when these kind of things happen, and they start in inactively rooting for you. Then we have, of course, the written skills, or the written communication, which is, of course, a very thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about selling yourself, because CVs come, of course, to your mind. Of course, other things that can be considered as written communication are messages, reports, chats, but also emojis. So written communication is absolutely wonderful way to communicate, because it's great for highlighting your skills and successes, especially when we're talking about your hard skills. So talking about your programming skills, for example, or other things that you've been doing in your work life. And there's this great aspect of time, because you have time to craft your message. So you don't need to immediately give a response, but you can have time to craft the message in a way that you want to. And you can let other people, for example, proofread it. But when we're talking about the written communication, one thing that we need to worry about a little is the tone of voice, or we can use it in our advantage, but of course be wary of it. Because when we are writing a message, for example, if I would just write for you, okay, dot, there's many different ways how you would interpret that. So would you see it as being quite stern, pretty neutral, happy? There's many different ways how people think that people are actually using their tone in written message. So when it comes to the do's and don'ts of written messaging, of course, especially with emails or Slack messages, be timely with your follow-up. So it's very common that when somebody sends you a message on Slack, that the other person responds, let's say next day, and then the other person again responds the next day. So it takes a very long time to convey very simple messages. So be timely on your follow-ups. It also shows that you are interested and you're motivated and you're here for the other person. Of course, be polite. That's quite given, but of course, here again, being wary of the tone of voice. And establish the ways of communication, especially when talking with a new person. So, and especially in a hiring process. So what are the tools that you'd like to use for communication, or what the other person uses? Is it email? Is it phone? Is there certain times that you are not responding, or are you going for a holiday? Tell these things in advance, so the other person is also understands how to communicate with you, but also it leaves a good impression that, okay, this person is great communicating about this important things, even though they are not asked. Then, of course, don'ts are write too much at a time. So writing these big novels is maybe something that is not encouraged, and it also doesn't give the other person room to respond unless it's at the very end where you've given already a big chunk of text. Do not leave people hanging. So even though you would not be interested or you don't want to continue the conversation, say something like, thank you, but I'm not interested. I'm not willing to continue this conversation, or whatever you feel it would be suitable for that situation. Because again, it leaves a bad mark if you just ghost people. And especially when we're talking about written communication, do not assume that people understand sarcasm, especially if you never met them face to face. It's when you haven't met that person face to face, it's very easy to create tension, like unnecessary tension, if you use sarcastic tone of voice and the other person interprets it completely differently. And especially for CV, here are some tips. So CVs are, of course, the business card that we need to start working on. Leave enough white space for your CV. Nobody wants to leave a text that is completely written like this. So leave a little white space on the sides or between the columns or so on. Don't start from the very beginning, from the ancient Romans or so on, because especially if you're super experienced and you have tens of years of experience and a lot of different projects, cherry pick the best ones and do not start from the very, very early ones, because then your CV is going to be very, very long. And the standard is that your CV should be definitely no longer than 3 pages. So everything that you want to show us should be in that CV. It does not mean that you should, if you're worrying about the fact that, oh, I'm not going to be able to show all my experience. That's not the point. CV is the business card. It's the one thing that you want to give people to get interested. And you can further on, when you're having an interview, explain further your other experience that is not within the CV. And use active words. So instead of saying project of 3 people or I did something, use active words. Actually, I did is a good example, but you can say I managed, I did, I produced. So using active words looks really confident in CVs, and again, it helps you to sell yourself. And check also a blog post from Thriv.dev. You can also see it probably now from chat, which is to create CV that sells. It really helps you to craft that perfect CV for you that really works on your works for you and helps you to get that perfect gig. Then, of course, we have the verbal communication, which is the face-to-face conversations, video conferences, calls, and meetings. So those kind of situations. So using your words. And it's crucial when it comes to selling yourself, because it allows you to connect with your audience on a deeper level and makes a more lasting impression. And here's also a little thing that we need to think about when we're talking about verbal communication. If we are just spatting out sentences, it's not that effective. Especially when we're selling ourselves, we need to learn the art of storytelling. So let's say that you're in an interview situation and the interviewer asks you to tell about a situation or a problem that you faced in your previous work. So instead of just saying, oh yeah, there was this problem, but then we implemented something and now it's fixed. That doesn't really create any kind of emotions, and it also doesn't stick to your head. So remember this art of storytelling. So first you start by setting the scene. So for example, you can start saying that, yes, I was in this great project with 3 other people, and I actually got into the project because I'm very enthusiastic about using a certain language, for example. So set the scene. So where are we? And then you can describe the challenge. So you can say, for example, that we were working on this project, and we were aiming to do something X, and we faced constantly this one problem, and it always came up and we didn't know how to fix it. It was a really buggy thing for us. So then you have this challenge, and then you can explain your approach. So this is a great moment for you to be the hero, so to speak. So you can start saying, for example, like one day I started to retract my steps and the ways that we have been working, and I actually figured out that when we had this we changed one person away from the team and we got another, there was this small glitch when we were conveying messages and so on, and that actually resulted in this problem. So again, something that you've solved. Share the outcome. So basically, what was the outcome? Everything was fixed, and in the end, the client was very happy with the product, and we get to go further and creating new features and so on. And you can also reflect on your experience, because it also shows you that you are able to go back to your experiences, and also makes it very clear for the other person too on what you have been learning. So you can say, for example, that it was actually a great learning point for me on how important communication is, especially when people are changing within the team. And it also helped me to gain more knowledge about this certain tech. And it's always great to learn new things. So this is much better way on explaining what you're doing and explaining what you have been doing, and also it gives the other person the opportunity to remember, like, aha, that was the person, like when they later on start to discussing who they have been interviewing, and they can say, oh yeah, that was the guy who had this that buggy problem. So they already remember you better, and they have this emotion about you. And then we can discuss a little about the do's and don'ts of verbal communication. Of course, what I'm doing, I tend to say, do what I say, don't do what I do. So for example, take breaks. This is, for example, something that is a bit challenging for me. I tend to babble along, but again, as said earlier, be yourself and build from there. But take breaks. It helps you, but it helps also the audience or the other person to listen and sort of and take time to understand what they have been hearing. Use appropriate language. So of course, regarding when considering the audience, think what kind of language you should use. So if you know the other person, can you be more relaxed or should you be more professional? And of course, if you're meeting with somebody who's not from, for example, from the tech world, are you using too much professional lingo or so on? So, or should you leave that away from that conversation? And when you're meeting somebody, don't be scared to show some enthusiasm. People love when people are excited about them and about their goals and about their things that they are working on. And of course, be concise. It's very easy to, when people ask you questions, that you start talking for full 10 minutes before you start asking questions about the other person. So be concise. And of course, when having a discussion, do not interrupt the other person. Even though there would be some kind of a tension between you two people, do not interrupt. Let the other person finish and respond after that. Try to avoid these, I don't know, these kind of sounds. Of course, those happen, it's very natural, but the amount of those sounds can be managed. Do not speak negatively about other people, because there's this also, of course, this saying that if they speak negatively about you, they're probably talking negatively. If they are speaking negatively to you about somebody else, they are probably talking about you to somebody else. So that's not actually a good vibe to sort of spread around. If you get any comments from the other person you're discussing with, do not pass those comments that you receive, or do not try to always react to the comments that you receive within that conversation. If you do not know the answer, you can get back to it later. And do not forget the other person when you're talking to somebody. I know it's very tempting to always talk about yourself, especially if you have an agenda. For example, when you're trying to sell yourself, it's very, very easy to just bubble what you have and bubble about your experience. But it's also very, very important to be interested about the other person. So also when we discussed earlier about the selling yourself and what it actually means, it's also about the making the person feel right. So how can we actually do that? So active listening is the perfect tool for this. And it's a crucial aspect for effective communication. I'll give you a great example from a few weeks back. I met this person, and I didn't know this person beforehand, and he introduced himself to me. And we started talking, and we talked for a good 30 minutes. We talked about his dog, we talked about his work, we actually talked about his travels, and we actually went quite deeply into his experiences and his life. During that conversation, this person didn't ask a single question from me. So while he did get his message through and he told everything he wanted to tell, I didn't feel I was heard, and I felt that this person did not listen to me, and I felt that this person did not have good communication skills. Even though we had a conversation for 30 minutes, it does not mean that the other person is actively listening. Of course, I was there. I was interested about this other person. I was asking questions about this other person. So the conversation kept going. But if I would have stopped, the conversation would have died immediately. So active listening involves fully engaging in the conversation, understanding the speaker's message, and responding appropriately, while passive listening is merely hearing what without actively engaging. So when you come to a meeting and you're telling about yourself, first of all, selling yourself, you need to be able to always remember that the other person also has their own agenda, and you need to be open to those two agendas to crisscross, so to speak. Don't be too protective about your own agenda, because there's so much things that you can learn about the other person if you actively listen. So here are some keys for active listening. So first of all, the things that we already have been discussing. So maintaining eye contact, good body language that we have been discussing before. So giving out that physical "I'm listening to you" message. Then paraphrasing the speaker's words, so it shows that you've understood the message. This means, for example, so what you're saying is, so you think the most important part is, and ABC and so forth. So paraphrasing is very, very important tool, and it also gives the other person an opportunity to clarify, for example, if there has been a misunderstanding. Then ask open-ended questions. This encourages dialogue, and it helps you to gain a deeper understanding of the speaker's perspective. Especially when you're selling yourself, it's not about you wanting to tell what you know, but you are there to solve the other person's problem. So you need to understand what the other person's problem is, and that you can do by asking open-ended questions when the conversation goes further. And also provide feedback to the speaker, so you can say verbally like, that's interesting, sounds good. Or can you elaborate a little? Or you can give these little cues like, yes, little sounds. It helps the other person to feel like, okay, we're on the right track still. And of course, respond with empathy and avoid judgment when having a conversation, because everybody comes from their own fruits, so to speak. So be open to the other person's message and be mindful of the other person's feelings and perspectives. While you may think that what you know is correct and true, it might not be true for the both of you. And if you're very adamant about your perspective, it might kill the conversation and it might kill the relationship. And then there is this massive, great tool for active listening, and I want to share with you, which is this yes and. And it's a powerful tool for active discussion. And it's a technique used in improvisational theater, which involves accepting and building on the ideas presented by others. And it's built from these three different parts. So one is listening, second is acceptance, which is yes, and the third one is and. And this is a great tool to use, for example, in client meetings or team meetings or brainstorming sessions, and of course, like interview situations and also negotiation. Because in that way, every single person's aspects will get acknowledged and you can build a common solution. And it also shows, it's very beneficial for you because it shows a positive attitude and that you're open to other people's new ideas. It highlights your collaboration skills because this is very high level collaboration. It demonstrates your flexibility and way of thinking. So you can also show that by doing this, you're able to backtrack from your views and accepting other point of views. And it also encourages creativity, and it helps you to think outside the box and helps definitely to also create new things. It's just not for you, but it actually results in a product. And it also builds rapport. So when people feel that you listen to them and you're interested in their ideas and willing to work with them for common solutions, you can establish a strong connection with people, which can again lead further opportunities in the future. So I'll demonstrate you a little on how this yes and thing works. So let's imagine there's a small group of people, and let's say that you're building an app. They are building an app. And the first person would say that I think we should use a map to show where all the cool events are happening. And the other person says, yes. And we could also add filters so people can search for events based on their interests, like music or art. And the other person continues, yes. And we could also include feature where users can save events they're attending to and save them to their personal calendars. And again, this goes further and further and further. Someone suggests to using user reviews to help people find the best events, and the other person suggests using social media integration, so on and so on and so on. And the people continue to use yes and to build on each other's ideas and come up with new more features for the app. So as they build with this yes and mentality, they end up with much more robust and innovative app than they would have if they had just stuck with their individual ideas. And this is the power of using yes and. And I'm going to be showing you also how this would also be demonstrated within a graph. So when we're building ideas together, when somebody gives an idea and you say yes and you build, it gives you this kind of a stack or a tree, for example. It looks a little bit like a Christmas tree, right? So when you get this massive amount of ideas, people feel that they are being heard, and it's actually really fun. And of course, some of those ideas in the end are something that you cannot use. You could consider them as dirt. But to get into the diamonds, you actually have to dig through a little dirt. And from there, you can find much more ideas compared to the picture on the right, that if you would say in the very beginning, when somebody suggests something is no, you never get to see what other ideas would have come out from that conversation. So giving room for the ideas helps more ideas to spread. And when you have all the material, you can then narrow down from those great ideas, the perfect diamonds, and you will be pleased, team will be pleased, and also the client is usually very pleased. And it also demonstrates on your creativity, and it gives an excellent report on you. So when we go down to the final parts of this webinar, you need to remember that selling yourself as a freelancer is, of course, a process. It never ends. And it requires, of course, a combination of your technical skills, but of course, the communication skills and how to use them together. So here are certain things that you can focus on different stages on whether where you are on when you're getting a gig. So if you're getting the gig for the first time or you're changing a gig, these are the certain things that you should focus on based on the things that we just discussed. So first of all, get your CV in shape. So you can check the blog post that was already posted on chat, but you can also, for example, Thriv has this great client tested CV template that you can, for example, use. And it really helps you also with the storytelling because it has those sections where you get to tell about yourself. And we can, of course, in Thriv help you on how to tell up your story and tell your CV further to clients. And of course, get rid of that mentality where you cannot sell yourself. So get rid of that could, should, would mentality. Be proud of your experiences. Do that good, very good, excellent exercises. For example, once a week. It takes you 1 minute, but it can give you very great results in just a few weeks. So I really recommend for you to do that, especially if selling yourself sounds very, very daunting. And active listening, especially very, very important tool, because when you're in an interview situation, you remember you are there to solve somebody else's problem, not just pretending yourself. So you need to find out what is actually the problem the other person is having. Of course, they need an in-person, but why you could be the one to solve their problem. And you need to tell them that. And of course, if you're already within a project and you want to continue with that, and you want to get that continuation contract. So focus on the partner level communication. So own up your communication. Don't wait up if something is bad or if something is good. Communicate that. If you need something to be fixed, communicate that. If something is good, communicate that. Keep the other people updated on the situation. And also remember that as a freelancer, you do not have a supervisor per se. So you don't have somebody who would be managing you in a traditional sense. So you need to be able to take care of that, and you need to be the manager's sort of friend, not an employee. And use the yes and, especially when you're working with a team, or you have people that you already know. Yes and is a perfect and great tool on creating new things together and building that team spirit, and also creating great rapport on you. And keep up the good work, keep up the good communication, and also ask for feedback. So if you feel that there's some communication issues, or if you feel that everything's going fine, just ask like, hey, how do you think that everything has been going through the past few months or past few weeks? And is there something you'd like me to develop further on? That is something that clients appreciate a lot. So without further ado, if you want to read any further, here are some references that you can check, for example, great numbers that you can see. But without further ado, thank you very much for having me here for this webinar. If you have any questions, please type them down on the chat, and also great thanks on my behalf. So again, my name is Linnea Saari, and I'm the founder of ImproLead. If you have any questions, you can catch me on ImproLead.fi, which is my website. Go check it out. But also you can send me an email on linneasaari@ImproLead.fi, or you can find me also on LinkedIn. So just find me with my name and send me a message, and I will happy to get back to you. And if you're part of the Thriv network, you always know where to find me. So of course, from Slack. So thank you very much for all of you, and hopefully you gained a lot from this webinar. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Linnea. This was really, really great presentation. So much good info there. I have a handful of questions, but maybe before I get into those, a personal reflection, and you can also tell me if you agree or disagree with it. I think communication is really, really hard. It's very difficult to get right, even when you do follow all the really great tips you gave. Personally, what I really liked about your presentation was that you had the do's and the don'ts for each section, because I think people can easily associate all the do's with, this is an extroverted person or more social, whatever it be. But I think something everyone can do quite easily, and where you should always start from, is to really pay attention to the don'ts. So, it can be hard. I should make eye contact, I should sit straight, but oh my God, am I making too much eye contact? Am I sitting too straight? But for me, it's always, when I go into a meeting and I want to communicate, hey, I'm really paying attention to you, I close my laptop, so I'm not distracted by the other things, for example. Yeah. So I always think that starting from the don'ts is kind of a very low barrier, and already you can really make quite a difference from that. What do you think?
Oh, yes, definitely. So the don'ts are very easy to start with, because there are those basic ones that you should definitely just avoid. So for example, the interruptions, because that can have a major effect on how the other person thinks about you. And again, I want to emphasize, be yourself, be natural, because when we're talking about this, oh, you need to be extroverted. If you're not, don't try to be one. Be natural, but you can take little instances from for example, about the things that I just presented you that are considered being extroverted. For example, the eye contact thingy can be considered maybe traditionally an extroverted thing. So you can take what feels natural to you and grow from there. And communication skills is something that people tend to overlook a lot. But it's like learning Japan. You can learn it. It's something that definitely can be done. So if you feel like you are not, you feel that you have something that you could still work on with your communication skills, there are places and there are courses, but there's just like these human interactions that we do where you get constant feedback and you can develop your skills. So if you feel that it's really daunting to you, don't worry about it. You're not alone, and you definitely can be helped. And yes, again, we're all unique people. So there's no one right truth on how you should communicate. So don't worry about it too much. How you communicate is usually quite fine. But this is, of course, how you want to fine tune it.
Yes, absolutely. I think the other thing to remember around all of this is, at least for me, to assume good intentions, I think, is always quite important. You can, oh, what did they mean by saying that? And that sounded a bit, but of course people can be menacing, but I find that most people aren't. So as long as you kind of assume that they meant it in a positive way, then communication can be a bit easier. But hey, I have a handful of questions and maybe one comment first. There was one comment which I think was quite good. It was about your point of turning on the cameras when you're working remotely. And this person says that's an excellent point, to turn on your cameras when you work remotely and be more available and more present to the customer. That they started doing this in their current project from the day one, even though nobody at that point, even from the client team, had their camera on. And a few weeks later, now everybody has their cameras on by default. And it's a lot more casual talk happening before the meeting. So it's really good way of communication. I think this is very, very good point. So yes, also agree on that. So yeah, a few questions. I'm just gonna go them through one by one. I try to not read them verbatim, but let's see. The first one is that how can you stay positive and communicative when the conversation is dying out? Or if the person you are talking with is not very communicative or maybe even intimidating to you, are there any practical tips on how to hold their attention you could give?
Well, of course, it's great. And in a perfect world, the communication would be that the both parties would be always interacting on the same level. But there's a lot of situations where the other person is not engaged or might be intimidating. So of course, the one thing that you actually, Thomas, said already is to think positive or think that the other person means good in that sense. So there might be that they are just, well, let's say bad communicators. They do not actually understand that the way that they are behaving is giving you the ick or giving you, or it makes you feel intimidated. So you can, of course, try to little overlook that and think positively. But of course, if the communication is not happening and the other person is not responding, you can, of course, like, you don't need to force an agenda. So you can ask, like, shift the conversation, start from something very basic. For example, it's quite hot in here, isn't it? There was great rain yesterday. Oh my God, I love the thunder. So take the conversation back to something very basic, because it usually relaxes the other person too. So when you get back to that, you can then engage again to the real conversation that you actually were talking about. And of course, if the conversation is not happening and you feel that the other person is, their mind is somewhere else, you can say, like, hey, do you feel that we should actually, like, reschedule this meeting for another time? Like, let's do a rain check, like, for example. Or you can just blame yourself, like, oh, actually, I'm having a headache now, or some kind of a, like, very a bit excusable, but something like, you don't want to make the other person feel bad. You can say, like, hey, can we actually do a rain check on this? And I'm feeling a little overwhelmed today. So would you be kind enough to have this conversation later on? I would love to chat with you, but today is not a great time. So this is always that if you want, you can get out of that conversation and do it later if needed.
Great, yeah, and I think this goes back to some things you mentioned also during your presentation, which I very much agree with, which is, you can address the awkwardness if you feel that there is some awkwardness, and most likely the other person feels that as well, and then that's an easy way to kind of get over it. And then I also think it's quite often that, it always goes both ways. So if you are a bit nervous, maybe the other person is also a bit nervous, so it can happen. Yeah.
Great point. And also, if the other person feels intimidating or awkward, you can also think, it's something that I'm doing, making the other person feel that way. So it's not always just the other person doing the wrong communication. So it's a great reflection moment.
Yep. Okay, then there's one question that I have a very strong opinion on, but let's see what you have to say first.
Wonderful.
What if someone asks me a question that I don't know the answer to or cannot answer? Or what do I do if I answer wrong? How do I handle these without looking bad? I think this is in a client context, maybe.
You can always say that that's a great question, and I don't have an answer right here, right now, but let me get back to you on this. So it's a great way to say it's never wrong to say that I do not know. You can say it's perfectly normal. Nobody knows everything. So you can do that. And of course, if you say, if you're wrong, you can say, like, hey, great point. And you can also ask them to elaborate if you feel that you do not agree on their definition. And then you can actually create a discussion about that. But it's also completely okay to say like, hey, thanks for pointing that out. And you might actually be correct on this one. And it actually makes the other person feel good, like, hey, I was better than this other person. So
yes,
it's nothing dangerous.
yes, that's my very strongly held opinion too. So we agree on this. I think it's never wrong to say that you don't know and just get back to it. So I think that's a sign of professionalism, actually, if you do that. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
And in those situations, never lie, because it's unprofessional.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We are a little bit over already. Maybe I ask one more, because I think this is kind of going to be interesting to people, but then we have to wrap it up. Could you give your best tips on giving constructive feedback to the client?
Okay, depending on the situation, this is quite a broad topic, but I would start the conversation with, if, for example, if something bad happened, so you can start the conversation like, hey, how do you feel that this certain thing went? How do you think it happened? Or what do you think that happened? Or how did we get to this point? So first of all, start engaging the other person, ask for their feedback. And after you've heard their point of view, you can say like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Then you can start explaining like, how you see the situation. And of course, why this, for example, this thing that you're critiquing on, what negative result it has resulted into. So making that visible also to the other person, because the other person may not know. So that's also valuable information to give to the other person. And from that, you can also end the conversation as in, how do you think that we should proceed with this? Or how do you think that we should develop further with this? So instead of accusing the other person on doing something wrong or your product is shit, I'm sorry for swearing, something like that is to actually have a discussion, hear the other person's point of views, and build from that and build a solution together.
That sounds very good. I would also agree with all of this. Thank you very much for sharing. Yeah, sorry everybody, we went a little bit over. One more time, Linnea, thank you so much for this really great presentation. I at least actually learned a ton today. I think this is a extremely interesting topic, and it's always interesting to hear some thoughtful insights on things, and give me also some things to think about in my own communication. I think it's a never-ending learning curve, this topic. So thank you. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm sure for everybody else, or I hope that you also took something away from this today. I'm sure you did. And I want to thank everybody else for their participation as well. One more time, if you find these kind of topics interesting, if you find the topic of freelancing interesting, please do reach out to us. We are always looking to add great talented people to our network. And if you are fast, who knows, you might even be able to get an invite to our amazing summer party, which is coming up. So there's an extra incentive for you to join our network. But yeah, I think with that we are done. Thank you once more, Linny. Thank you everybody for participating, and enjoy the rest of this very, very sunny day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.